It is now late August, and I feel like this time of year for everyone that has a garden or has animals or lives on a farm or out in the country is just really, really busy because it seems like there are so many loose ends to wrap up and so many things that need to be stored away for winter and animals that need to be butchered and things that need to be harvested. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you some different options besides canning in order to preserve all that goodness out of your garden. And to be honest, overall, I would say I really enjoy canning. I enjoy preserving food. But by the end of summer, I am sick of pulling out the pressure canner. I'm sick of using a water bath. And so it's great to know that there's some other options out there. I'm not going to be speaking on canning today, and the reason for that is I think there are people out there who are so much beyond me when it comes to canning. It seems like every year I think I have something figured out, and then something happens, and I'm like, and I thought I knew how to do this. So I could go on all day about how much I love canning, about the wonderful memories I have of canning as a child, but I will leave giving advice and tutorials on how to can to the experts because I still need them because my food doesn't always turn out right. My jars don't always seal correctly. Sometimes the water is sucked out of my jars in the pressure pot, and I'm still not sure why. So I'm going to stick with the drying and freezing today. All right, first off, I want to talk about drying and freezing fruits, vegetables, and your herbs because these are two of the simplest and easiest ways to preserve your harvest throughout the entire winter. And so my mom is really the first one who introduced me to a lot of drying because she has her dehydrator going basically all summer, drying vegetables, drying tomatoes, drying kale, all of these different things out of her garden. And she's found it so incredibly easy to just then sprinkle these compact small amounts of vegetables into soup to get a ton of nutrition out of it or get a ton of flavor out of a stir fry she's making. So a few things I'm drying this year is a lot of herbs. I'm drying peppermint because I want to make tea, and I'm also drying different herbs in like a seasoning that I'll be showing you how to do later on that I'll be able to pull out during the winter. And so I'm really excited. I've tried a couple of these things before, but the seasoning is totally new to me. So I'm going to be taking you along as I go through the garden real quick and collect a basket of stuff that I'm going to freeze or else dry. And I do this every couple of days now throughout the entire summer. And so my freezer is getting full and my pantry is getting filled up with dried goods, which I am really excited about. So after I got those herbs, I actually picked some kale, and you can either dry kale or freeze it. My mom dries it, I freeze it, and the reason for that is because I like to put it in smoothies, and I feel like it just has the least amount of taste when it's frozen. I honestly have no clue whether it does or not, but it works so well because after it's frozen, you can take the bag and crumble it into like a cup full of crumbled, super dense kale that you can put in smoothies, you can put it in stir fries, and it doesn't have a lot of taste, yet you get a lot of nutrition in a small amount of space, which I think is really amazing. So really quickly, I ran out to the garden and I picked a whole bunch of green beans, and I've been picking about 3 gallons every couple of days, and there's so many more that need to be picked, but it's so hot right now. I kind of have to force myself to go out there and pick because it's just not fun in the middle of the day. I usually can green beans. In the past, I've always canned them, and I like having canned green beans. The only thing is that canning green beans takes so incredibly long, in my opinion, because you have to use a pressure cooker and you have to break off all of the tips, and it just takes such a long time. And so instead, this year I decided to start freezing, and part of the reason for that was actually because we actually have enough freezer space this year. I can freeze a lot of this stuff, and so that is what I'm doing next. So far, I think I've frozen close to 10 bags, which is really exciting because they make great gifts for people. It's easy to throw a whole bunch in a pan and saute it with butter and serve it up for dinner or make a green bean casserole. And so it's a really easy option that kind of cuts down on that canning for that much longer into the season. Typically, if you read about how to freeze vegetables, it'll recommend that you blanch them in hot water, which is just dipping them into hot water for a couple of seconds. I've never actually done this, partially just because of the time and partially because then my green beans are wet and so they freeze and all clump together, which is really inconvenient. I've never had any problems with it, but I will let you know if for some reason my green beans get all squishy and gross. I'm not expecting them to though, and I assume we'll use them up within this winter. So here are my bags of green beans. Pretty exciting. So the first year my husband and I were married, I of course wanted a big garden, and so we tilled up this area in our yard and I planted a whole bunch of stuff. And the only thing that did amazingly well was my kale. I had so much kale, it was crazy, and I'm not a huge fan of kale. And so I ended up freezing gallons and gallons of kale and then breaking them into tiny little crumbled pieces and being able to fit gallons of kale in like a couple bags in my freezer. And honestly, part of it probably got thrown away, but the other part of it we used in smoothies. And so that's what I'm doing today. And I am not having so much success with my kale this year, but that's okay with me. So I'm just tearing off the leaves, getting rid of the big stalks, and I'm going to be freezing this in gallon bags. And a neat thing about this is that you can suck the air out of the bag and it really fits in a compact area of space, which is really nice. You can also do the same exact thing if you're drying. Just pull the big stalks off, put your leaves in the dehydrator or in your stove with the pilot light on, and you will have dry, crisp, crumbly kale in a matter of hours. The next thing I love freezing is zucchini, and the reason for this is usually you will have a ton of zucchini in a really short season, and so I like to freeze all my extra zucchini and I'll put it in Ziploc bags of 2 cups of zucchini in each bag typically, and I'll write that on the bag sometimes so I don't forget, and that way I can pull it out and make zucchini bread or zucchini muffins extremely easy during the winter. And all you have to do is open up the bag, then set the bag in your sink and let it thaw until it's all squishy and mushy. Dump out the extra liquid, and then you have that you can put immediately into your recipe, and you don't have to use quite as much if it's been frozen. My mom actually used to dry zucchini, and so if you don't have freezer space, put it in a thin layer in your dehydrator or on a pan in the oven, and turn on the pilot light or turn it on the lowest setting in your oven, and you can actually dehydrate it, put it in a jar, and there you have zucchini throughout the entire winter that you got over the summer. So you're once again preserving that delicious vegetable all year round. Another thing I cannot freeze enough of is strawberries, and they are so incredibly handy because I can pull them out later and turn them into jam when I have more time than I did the day I was picking them, or else I can put them in a smoothie, I can make a pie out of them, I can put them on yogurt. It's just such a handy option to have for fresh fruit throughout the winter. And so besides those freezing things, which I do typically almost every year, the next thing I wanted to move on to is drying. And like I mentioned, I am drying a lot of peppermint to make tea. And I'd actually like to dry some rose hips and maybe some lavender and try to figure out tea mixes. I think that would be a really fun fall thing to do. But for today, I'm just pulling the leaves off of these stalks, hanging them up, being sure that they dry all the way before I take them down, and then I just strip the leaves off the stalks, throw the leaves in a jar, and then I have tea all year round. This is also the same type of an idea if you wanted to dry herbs like I'll be doing later as well. Just be sure that you hang them up with a rubber band. I actually hang mine out on the porch because we have no humidity right now in this time of the year, and so they've been drying really excellently outside for a couple of days. Or you can put them in the dehydrator, put them in your stove, whatever works. This next idea that I'm going to mention, I get no credit for it. I did not think of it at all. But if you have not watched the Elliott Homestead, I highly recommend you look them up on YouTube. They have such amazing, well done, high quality videos. So their channel shared this fabulous idea. All you're going to need is a couple cups of salt, a couple cups of whatever type of herbs you choose. You're going to blend everything up, either using a mortar and pestle or else using a food processor. Put it in a pan, let this salt and herb mixture dry until it's totally dried, and then you put them in a jar, and you have a fabulous way that you can use your herbs throughout the entire winter that is so much easier than breaking off crispy, crunchy, dried, falling apart leaves from hanging up on your wall and trying to sprinkle them over a chicken. And so I used sage, thyme, and oregano along with salt, blended it all up, and made this fabulous batch of seasoning, and I absolutely love it. I put it on a chicken that we roasted the other night that we butchered a couple of weeks ago, and it was amazingly good. So this is the best way I could recommend you use to dry your herbs. However, if you do want to have any herbs dried in the more traditional fashion of just hanging them up on your wall and letting them dry, I just create a pretty little bouquet, put a rubber band on the end, and either hang it up outside to let it dry if there's for sure going to be no rain, or also just put it somewhere in my house, and it looks like a beautiful decoration in the process of drying. And then you can either just pull it off and use it from there, or else you can put it into a jar. Okay, the last thing I wanted to cover today is freezer jam. And for the longest time, I've always canned my jam because we've never had the extra freezer space. But now that we do, it's so wonderful because I was able to make a whole bunch of jam and just freeze it, which really cuts down on a big, hard part of making jam, which is all the water bathing that you have to do, unless you're going to flip the jars upside down and allow them to suction themselves, which I just learned about recently and have done a batch now, and it turned out really well. So I'm super pleased with that. But if you do want to make freezer jam, it is wonderful because it does cut down some of the extra steps that are usually necessary when making jam. So to close out this summer's day, I made a big batch of rhubarb and strawberry jam. And I just added everything to a big pot, added a whole bunch of sugar, added a whole bunch of pectin, and based it all off of a recipe, although I did use different fruits than the recipe recommended. And now we have some fabulous freezer jam in our freezer that I am able to pull out at any time or give to anyone I wish. And it was so incredibly easy and so incredibly good. You know, one last thing that I wanted to mention at the end of this video is that I sure hope I never come across as like I have all this figured out or I know exactly what I'm doing, because that is in no way the case. And there are so many times I make a meal and it doesn't turn out, or the freezer gets shut off and we lose part of our meat, or the jars didn't seal right and so part of the food goes bad. I mean, my husband knows it's time to eat when the smoke alarms go off. Like, that's a reality in our house. And so my goal with these videos is not to act like I know everything or give you perfect advice and perfect theology on how to do these different things. My goal is to convey the true love and passion that I think we can have for growing a little garden, or raising a couple chickens, or going out and seeing my brother's cows, or teaching my daughter something through growing a bed of carrots. That is my goal. My goal is to communicate the beauty within the simplicity of farm life or homemaking or homesteading, because sometimes I think that can go a bit neglected nowadays. And I know for myself, it's so easy to get caught in the rut of thinking if I just had more possessions, or if we just had more money, or if I just had a certain title, then I would be fulfilled, when there is so much fulfillment in just the simple, everyday beauties of ordinary life. And that is my goal in these videos. And that is what I ultimately hope that I convey.